Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we'll be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing the Ravenhood series by Kate Stewart. Mariah and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Muhammad's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at Lib Podcast. We're on Blue Sky on Lib Podcast. What else are we on? Is that it? Threads, Literary Liberation.
I think that's it. We're doing a lot of transitioning right now due to the TikTok ban, so we are over there. We also I don't know if you said, we started a book club
No, I didn't.
for the new year. I
Yes.
didn't put this in yet. This is very new. This is hot off the press. This got announced this week. Over on Fable, we are going to be running a book club on Fable. What the fuck? You know what I mean? We're going to read a book a month, and then that book is also going to be something that we review for the podcast. So if you want to read along with us and also discuss with other people that maybe, I think, listen. I don't know if a lot of people on there are listeners, but if you're somebody that listens and you're like, hey, I want to read along and kind of get your thoughts and ideas of like what's going to happen before the episode, maybe go check that out.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to link that below to a link to join. But other than that, I'm your co-host Kristen. You can find me at KRXXCXN on all social media platforms.
And I'm Mariah. You can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms. Sorry, we're doing this a lot earlier than we normally do. So
Yeah,
I just drank my coffee,
I'm
my
booked and
millennial pork. I
busy.
have my coffee. So I'm trying. I'm gonna do
Um,
it. This also Kristen's not happy about this book series that we're reading, so this is gonna be a little bit. It's gonna be kind of
okay.
like Credence. If you listen to the Credence level or episode, it's gonna be kind of like Credence.
Okay, but I want to state my piece now and here for everyone to hear. So
Before we get into it,
this is a 3-book series, okay? I read the first one, and spoiler alert, is the worst book I've read this year. It's I won't talk about too much about it just yet. I can save my criticisms for later. But I read all I don't know, what is it, 350-page book? It's longish. It's towards the
yeah, it's
longer end.
really long.
For
For what it is,
for what it yeah.
it is very long.
And then the second book, I proudly am DNFing. I DNF'd it last night. But not without reading 300 pages first. And this book is the Kindle version is 537 pages. So I still had 237 pages, and I got to the big I don't know if anybody's seen this book blow up on TikTok and people are screaming crying. I got to the part where people are screaming crying, and I was like, if this is the most emotional payoff you get, I do not care to consume this book anymore. The plot is basically over for what I would basically care about, and that's it. So I did not finish Exodus, even though I watched Lexi, aka Newly Nova, on YouTube. She did an hour and a half recap of the first 2 books. I watched that. So I am familiar with it. I did not read the third book. I will not plan on reading the third book. Um, Mariah will probably go over the major plot points if any of them are super relevant to our discussion. But I gave it a good college try, and I read 300 pages of it, and I feel like the book could have ended right there, and it would have been the same, I'm sure. I probably would have had the same feelings that I went in with, and it did not get better. So, just saying.
So I read the whole series. I did it in the course of a week in October. Like I read it or like right into November because the last one took me a little bit to get through. I read the book that Kristen's talking about, couldn't get through it over the course of 24 hours. Like it's a very sloppy, messy. It reminds me a lot of 50 Shades of Grey. If you've ever read 50 Shades of Grey or know like the plot of 50 Shades of Grey, it's kind of like the vibes are there. Not exactly a one-to-one like they're different. They're very different, but like they're very similar in the story structure, I think. But the politics, there's background politics in these books, and I was looking through the reviews and nobody's talking about them. And I find that extremely concerning because we have a rise of anti-intellectualism, not just in the bookish spheres, but in general in our society, but also some of the politics that are happening in the background of this are kind of on point with other things that are happening in social media with a certain individual that is like a Super Mario Bros name. Like there's themes. I have to be careful because anyone that's mentioning the L Man is being like interviewed by the feds. So we're gonna have to be really careful with how we discuss some of the contemporary issues. So just I'm putting that out there. This is gonna tie back into that.
By Mariah saying that the politics are, like, relevant,
They are n-
I want you to anybody that's, like, thinking about, like, "Oh, I was interested in reading this." If you're interested in reading this, just read it, like, if you like that, that's your thing to like, I would not but the politics being relevant in this are politics for, like, 1 out of every 100 pages, and all of the other 100 pages are smut scenes.
Yeah, there is an unnecessary amount of, like, erotica scenes. However, the politics in it do play into the fact of, like, the relationships, the dynamics, and the overall, like, carrying to the next smut scene, and that is what I kept trudging through these books to get to the center, figure out what the author's politics were, and also, like, what kind of idea they were pushing forth, and it's a little questionable, but we haven't really gotten into it. So if you don't know what Flock and specifically Exodus got super popular on Book Talk. Everyone was posting themselves crying when they're like, "Oh my god, this book is ruining me," to Exodus a couple months ago. Kristen was like, "Hey, you should read this because I will read just about anything. If it's got words, I'll probably read it." And you know what? I I
Mhm.
we're just going to do it. So if you let's get into the summary of this for people that don't know. This is so
Honestly,
I'm only going to talk about Flock.
save yourself now. Just watch this episode, watch Newly Nova's, like, plot summary of the first 2 books. I am not recommending the series. I think it is a waste of your time. It's, like, over 1,000 pages because the 3rd book is even longer than the 2nd book, and I don't even understand how it could be longer than the 2nd book because it's ultimately a waste of your time. The payoff is not there if you're a Marxist, I will say. I'm
No, not at
sure
all. And I
if you're
think it
someone
could
else,
kind of,
then
like, lead you on. It kinda gaslights you a little bit into thinking there might be something of substance there, and there's not. But this is what Flock is, right? This is a description
don't read the
from
description, it's so
Goodreads.
stupid. No,
It's
because
really bad, but
this
hold
is
on.
also
We have to
the
come up with this.
prologue.
It is. I don't know why that is the way
Okay, basically,
it's set
you
up.
the plot of Flock is you're following this teenage girl, and I say teenage because she's 18, 19,
She
majority
literally
of
just graduated
high school.
high
So
school,
she's
I
a
think.
teenage girl that is moving to live with her rich CEO father, in this
In
town
Triple
called
Falls.
in Triple Falls, which is, like, North Carolina, Blue Ridge Mountains, uh, West Virginia, not really West Virginia, I think it's North Carolina or whatever, because she talks about her dad living in Charlotte a lot. Um, but anyway, she goes to move with her father because basically she's got mommy issues. Her mommy is an alcoholic, and she's kind of like spiraling, and she's moving in with her new boyfriend, but her new boyfriend doesn't have room for Cecilia, which is our main character, to move in with them. So then she's basically like, "Sorry, you have to go live with your dad if you want your inheritance from him because he's a rich CEO, and you have to live with him for a year and work at his factory and basically spend some time with him for him to make sure that you're good enough to give this millions of dollars trust fund to live and do whatever you want with your heart's desires." So she's basically like, "Okay, I will sacrifice through this life of hell because I was basically raised by a single mother my whole life so that she can get some of the payoff of me suffering for this year, blah blah blah." And she goes there and she meets her boss, the sexy dude named Sean, who's a freak.
He's like
And
26, but, like,
yeah,
this, like, snowballs into something, and I don't wanna get into the spoilers, but, like, that's the premise that this book is, like, based around, right? Is, like, she meets these, like, older men, and it's supposed to be, like, this darker romance, like, taboo trope,
on the
whatever.
back of the
Um,
book, it does state that it is a Robin Hood retelling as well. So you do have like the stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, overarching subplot that is largely irrelevant to this being a vehicle of smut, in my
I
opinion.
don't like described as that. I think that's really interesting because we
Ravenhood,
I don't neither of us
Robin
have.
Hood.
Yeah, I was gonna say is that I thought that was really interesting because I also picked up on that because of the way the name of the book is, but neither of us have physical copies of this book.
No.
So I didn't have a back of the book, so it was just on Kindle, it's on KU. But
Yeah.
here's where it's crazy, right? The overall ratings for this, like this is a very popular series. Flock has 200,000 ratings, right? 19,000 reviews, averaging 4.12 stars. Exodus has 158 ratings, and 17,000 reviews.
158,000.
Yeah, 158,000 ratings. Sorry. 17,000 reviews, averaging 4.40 stars. The Finish Line has 116,000 ratings and 10,000 reviews, averaging at 4.26 stars. So, like, each of these books is getting well over 100,000 ratings. So, people who have read it and decided to rate it, and then the additional, like, those reviews with the 4.0, like, I think you range between 3 to 7% rated it less than 3 stars. So, overwhelmingly, people are positively enjoying these.
But also, again, like the people that are probably reading these books, no offense, no offense, but this is like the genre that they can consume of like dark romance, smut, and those types of things. Like if you're reading this slow, I'm assuming like you're like me. I don't read dark romance. I don't read uh whatever contemporary romance if that's what you want to call it. If you don't want to consider this a dark romance, like this is not a book series for us, and I don't care how like Mariah rates these radical politics that they allegedly have. I would argue that they do not. And if you watched our Will of the Mini episode and her criticizing them like making the revolutionaries like problematic, this book does it 10 times worse, in my opinion.
Kristen also didn't finish it all. So you have that. You have that going for you. You have always
I
been a
read
person that's like,
one
well, if you
book.
didn't finish it,
I
you didn't
read one
finish it,
book.
and you didn't finish the third one. So I have that over you, and I have lines, and we're going to discuss it because I think it's relevant to wrap back around. This is not a Babel level. I've never advertised it as being Babel level, but there are like genuine revolutionaries that are made mentioned in this, and it's very confusing. So we're going to just discuss the politics. I don't think either of us give a fuck about any of the characters in the sense of like their relationship dynamics because it's just annoying and I think it gets in the way of what I want to talk about. It's just the politics because I look through the reviews of all of these books and like nobody's talking about the politics in a meaningful way
Yeah, I
and
wonder
it's
why.
bothering me
Yeah, I
with
wonder
how
why.
popular this is. No, but Kristen, I'm telling you, we have to get into the spoilers. We can't do it without talking about the ratings, right? Because I think this is going to be relevant. And also, I had to fill Kristen in on
The third
the
book.
third book.
But we can talk about the first two because I know what happens in the first two entirely.
Yes, but I will finish where you got or like whatever. I don't know where we're going. Neither of us would recommend these books. This is going to be messy. This will be about as messy as the books are. So, no,
Um,
don't read them. Just listen. Just listen to what we're saying because we have lines and stuff from the books. And
I do.
also, I looked at no, I was gonna say for anyone that's wondering, I looked into who the author is. There's not a whole lot about who she is or like the books that she watched. It's just like general author stuff. But she did have controversy in her book Drive, where there was ableist language, Hitler jokes, and Jewish slurs, and the white female character with an offensive black accent dresses up as Medea. So I've heard that that has been rectified. There is a Patreon post that we can also link to read about that, but there's nothing about this series in particular, just a different book that she had put out, which I thought was interesting. And I think it adds to the politics of this because it's going to full circle and I'm going to explain it. So we're entering the spoiler zone, I think.
I don't really think it's like spoilery because you shouldn't read this. I don't think it's worth your time, especially if you like good books. No offense, but
No, this felt like reading like a reality TV show. Like it was just a very different change of pace from some of the other stuff that I had been reading, and I was just like, "What the heck?" And everything is just messy
before
and cringe.
we get into it, Mariah did give the second book 5 stars, and I have the Goodreads screenshot to prove it. So take Mariah's defense with a grain of salt, especially if you are on the same page as me.
Listen, I rated it, like, right after I had read it. It was
Mhm.
very emotionally exhausting after reading it for 24 hours straight. So and I did cry, but I think I was just tired of reading it. But then I changed my ratings. I think I gave them, like, what, a 2.5. It's everything's accurate on Storygraph. The Storygraph
I
is
don't know,
my
I
most
didn't check your
accurate
story graph.
rating platform. I don't think the second one is as bad because in the second half of the second one, the main character has good character growth, and I really appreciated it.
You have it
But you don't get to see that.
3.75, the second book on Storygraph, which is
Which
objectively, I would say that's a good rating.
I could go back and change some of these. I
Okay.
would never recommend them. They're very entertaining though. I thought they were very entertaining,
Entertaining if you
and
like boring shit, maybe. I was not entertained.
just go through Kristen's Goodreads and you look at who you resonate with best.
I just want you to know, like, look, I started Flock on November 3rd. I didn't finish that book until December 15th. It took me over a month to read the first book. That is 366 pages. Over a month to read one book. That is not good. I started Exodus, like the 15th or whatever. We are currently recording this on the 22nd. And I only
It's
had
been a
gotten
week.
300 pages in because I have no desire to pick up this book. I was choosing to actively not read at all, so I didn't have to read this book because I felt guilty if I wasn't reading this book because I knew we had to do it for the podcast. But I was like, well, I just won't read. So then yesterday I sat and binged and I read like 200 pages of it because for the week I'd only been at 100 pages until Friday night. This is a Sunday we're recording this, and then I binge Friday night. I read like 100 pages, and then all day Saturday I read like 100 pages. And I'm like, this shit still sucks. So I just gave up.
Kristen is very particular about the books that they read. I There's no
I'm
questioning that. You
typically
are incredibly picky with your
typically
books.
I am not a giver upper though. That is the thing. I do not DNF. And that's how bad this was if even I had to DNF. That's what I'm saying. I'm not a
I think you're in
DNFer.
a minority here. It really wasn't that bad to read. It was an
Okay,
easy
other
peasy
people
read. Like, it's not written like, it's you
I
can't like, the ratings on it, it's crazy. Like, a lot of people are reading this and thinking it's fine.
it
Like,
was
the pace I
boring.
didn't have a problem with the way it was written. Like, there are boring parts, but Kristen also doesn't read boring books, and I do read, like, what is deemed, like, pretentious boring books, so I can get through just about anything. Like,
It's
it's
not
not
even that it's
that boring.
pretentious. It's just like 90% of like literally like I'm not even kidding. I read 30 pages and there was 3 different smut scenes in 30 pages. Like I want a plot. I don't care about these people doing the do.
It's a romance, though.
Okay, there are romances that don't like I'm not even saying that I
That's
hate
what I'm saying. I was
romance
like,
or
with
anything.
your romance, the ones that you pick, right? This is
Even
not it.
Butcher
Like,
and
you don't read
Blackbird.
anything like this.
Butcher and
Well, yeah, like
Blackbird
Butcher and
doesn't
Blackboard,
have
it's like so anyways, we're getting off
It's
task. We need
not
to
like it's all literally just a vehicle for like erotica. Like this is just erotica. This is not even like plot. This is nothing. This is literally it's garbage. I'm sorry. It's
but
terrible.
it's garbage that may be sending people down the alt-right pipeline, and that is
I
what
mean, I could see
concerns me.
that.
So that is what we're going to discuss because the third part of this book is what solidifies it. And Kristen and I, being Marxists, being people that support like the abolition of all forms of oppression, I think it would be a disservice if we didn't cover this book because of the way the third book ends up going, and with how many people have read it and nobody's talking about the politics of it is a little bit concerning to me.
Well, okay, let's start with the politics of the first book. So, with Flock, especially because this is the only one that I fully know, like not the ins and outs of. I wasn't like super into it, but basically ignoring the romance because it is creepy that like these pushing 30-year-old men are preying on this 18, 19-year-old woman girl. Very creepy, very weird. Don't like the vibes. It's described as being like a reverse harem, which I would argue it's not because the boys don't even kiss. So it's not even good in the way that Challengers is good. Like if it would have that aspect, maybe I would have been more into it. Where because Challengers is very uh like very extensive and it's like a lot more you get so much more tension and that's usually what I prefer in my romance, not this like insta being together, insta being in love, blah blah blah. But putting that aside, basically you have Cecilia, whose father is a I don't think he's ever described as a billionaire, but he definitely is a multi-millionaire for sure. He's rich. He owns multiple factories around the country and around the world, I think, producing calculators.
Yeah.
And basically, you kind of get this story of Cecilia where you're basically expected to care about her because she was raised by a single mother who was always working and she was very poor, even though she had this rich dad that basically never provided any type of financial benefit for them, did anything for her and her mother. And so they were just kind of stuck being like poor people. And she's like, I don't understand how a rich person who had like chose to do this stuff to be with a woman, blah blah blah, who obviously still like loves him, blah blah blah, and just abandons her and his child. Which I know you learn why he did it later on, but it's not relevant to Flock. So you basically just have uh Cecilia living in this mansion where her father is never there. He is off on business trips doing whatever, and you have her working at this factory while also like banging her supervisor. And she basically is like in this mundane cycle of going to work, going to hang out at these parties with these quote unquote revolutionaries, and then doing it all over again. Like that's literally like I would say majority of Flock is work, party, smut, home, work, party,
But
smut,
then
home.
when you do get the plot, you see like these two men who are like trying to like get class consciousness across to her, despite the fact that she probably should have class consciousness based on like the way she had grown up,
Yes. Because
but
they're
does not, completely lacks it. But it's done through like Dominic has a copy of like 1984 by George Orwell. So that was like the first moment I saw. I was like, okay,
well,
not my favorite book, but it was like, okay, that's something. That's really weird.
because even before that, there's a scene where like Sean and Cecilia are at the laundromat, right? And she is waiting in the car or whatever while Sean goes inside to fold the laundry or whatever because like they're renting their house, they don't have washer dryer hookups, whatever. So then she's like sitting in her car and she's like looking at this lady who's like slaving over the making these tortillas at this Mexican restaurant. She's like doing this for hours and hours, like this repetitive thing. And she, like, Cecilia notes, like, oh, she looks so happy. She's like, it must be so nice to have a job that you love, blah, blah, blah. So then she's making these tortillas or whatever. And then she has to go up to the register and, like, put money in or whatever. So then she goes up to the register and Cecilia catches her stealing money from the top of the register. And Cecilia's like, oh my God, I caught her. She's this evil, evil woman that is stealing from a business. How evil. And then who pulls up in the car next to her? Her disabled grandson and son-in-law or whatever, who are like poor people who are suffering, who her grandson's like arms and legs don't work. He's blind, he's deaf, and it's just like a boy in a wheelchair that's just like suffering. And she's like, "Oh my God, poor people steal to help their family." And it's like, yes,
Like, no
hello?
fucking shit.
Like, you don't have this empathy already built into you with you growing up poor. I just literally read 150 pages about how much your mom did for you while being a broke bitch. Like, hello? And it's like, something doesn't click. And this is like, obviously, this is a fictional book, but I feel like this is like, shows me too about how, like, people just growing up with wealth inequality does not mean that that is enough for them to be radicalized, to be a Marxist, to hate capitalism, to want to disrupt capitalism. Just
Yeah,
because
and, like, this theme continues throughout the entire, like,
first
first
book.
book and a
Yeah.
half,
Yeah.
right? And it isn't
Yeah.
until you get to the second half of the second book and then the third book that you see, like, the politics develop a little bit more where Cecilia has to like internalize all these things, and like there's all of this stuff that like goes down. Like I don't think there's anything else relevant in the first book, if I'm going to be honest, besides that point, like to Cece's character.
I think there's another scene where Dominic like shows her something to like try to give her empathy too, because like she's just like such a like she is not an empath. Let me tell you, she is like the opposite. Like she sees like she believes in everything being so objective and stuff like that. Because there's even that scene I think that is relevant to mention in Flock, where there is a worker where one day Cecilia is at the factory or whatever she is working, and one of the employees gets upset because their check was shorted, which is something that we know happens all of the time. Wage theft is one of the biggest thefts in America. It is the biggest theft in America, more than burglary or anything else you want to say. Wage theft is the highest theft in America. And so you have this disgruntled employee who sees that their overtime is not on their check. And overtime typically, I think legally has to be at least time and a half for most businesses. So that's probably a big chunk of change they're missing from their check, and they go up to Cecilia and like, "Hey, like your dad owns the company. What the fuck?" And she's like, "Oh, well, like I don't like my dad, so like it's not my fault. I can't do anything about this. I'm just a worker just like you, blah blah blah." In reality, she doesn't even understand like the type of privilege that she has because she is able to even set up a meeting with her father and just be like, "Please be a better CEO. There's no AC there and we're all sweating and you're shorting everyone's checks." And then her dad's all like, "Oh, well, like, I can't do everything. I own so many businesses. How am I, a small billionaire man, supposed to do all of this stuff for all of my factories? I am just one guy." And that is like your idea to you're supposed to gain like sympathy for him, where like her father is like such a nothing character. It's honestly,
You know what's crazy though? Is like as the story progresses, especially in the third book, is they do their damnedest to humanize him, right?
yeah,
To the point where it is unbearable because, like, Cecilia doesn't have any sense of, like, okay, she's living in this, like, mansion and does not have to
yes.
pay for anything.
She
She's
has a
just like, "Oh, I want a
pool.
Jeep." She's got
Yeah,
a pool, she's got food, she, like, does not have to pay for anything, like, it's all just supplied to her, but all she's gotta do is work at this factory, and she's just like, "I don't even want it." I was like, "Well, then give it to me.
yeah,
Give it
give
to
it to
the
the
workers." Like,
workers.
there's people that are like, "Give it to somebody," right? And luckily, she does have some sort of change because there's a lot that happens. You get to the second book, I don't really think there's anything relationship-wise that we need to focus on in the second book, 'cause nothing happens in the first
Well,
half
because
of the
basically
first
in
or
the
second
first
book.
book, she's with these 2 guys, Sean and Dominic, where they're basically, like, in a polyamorous relationship, again, where the boys don't kiss. So it's basically like sister wives, but for men. So she basically just gets to have 2 boyfriends where she hangs out with one whenever it's sunny out, and whenever it's rainy, she hangs out with the other one. Like, that's it. But then, basically at the end of the first book, which she kind of starts getting involved in, like, I don't even know, the Ravenhood, like, whatever you wanna call it,
Like, she
gang,
wants to.
whatever,
She's like, "Yeah, I can be involved," and I
and
think we're
she's
kind of
like,
led to
"Oh, like,
believe it's
what's
kinda like a
going on?"
mafia.
Yeah, and then she's like, "I she literally knows nothing, and they tell her nothing." They like, we learn nothing in the first book about anything about what they're doing. You get, like, the vague sense that, like, they're rebellious to the government and rebellious to Roman and that they're doing something with that type of wealth, until literally, like, the last 10 pages of the first book where Sean basically pulls her aside and it's like, "Yeah, so actually your dad might have killed, Dominic's mother and father in, like, a preventable fire or something like that," which, again, I know this ends up being completely irrelevant later on. Um, but
It
basically,
doesn't.
what do you mean it doesn't?
It doesn't in the 3rd book, but we have to finish getting through this one
But
because we keep
anyways,
talking about this one. I'm trying to get ahead so we can talk about the rest.
but we have to talk about that. And so then basically then Dominic and Sean basically get sent off to who knows where and blah blah blah. Like they basically can't talk to Cecilia anymore. They're like, "We have to go, but wait for us. We will be waiting for you," sort of thing. And then the second book basically starts as New Moon from Twilight.
The 2nd book is really
Over
centered around her getting to know Tobias, right? Which is like this Frenchman that gets introduced at the very end of the book and ends up being the most
This is
relevant character
Dominic's
throughout
older
the rest.
brother,
Yes,
which
Dominic's
is
older
one of the
brother.
dudes that she was fucking.
And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think there's anything to dwell on in the first half of this book because it is just relationship.
I know,
You
and
don't
I
really
had
get a whole lot of, like, consciousness, but it
there's
is
a
the
scene
second
where
half, so
he
we're gonna
takes her to
speed
a
forward ahead.
bank to be like,
Yeah, it goes to a
"Point
bank to
out
discuss about
point
how
out the criminal."
exploitative. Yeah, to try to, like, get her, like, in her head, like, "Oh my gosh, it's actually the criminal was the banking system," and I was like, "Okay, like, that's great, like, that's much better
Okay,
than, like, what we had before, like, we're getting something of substance because it's, like, less focused on, like, oh, one person, like, I don't know, like, the banking system, at least you could make that connection.
okay.
Whatever. We got
It's very lackluster.
It is. It's very frustrating because like this is still like the motivating thing throughout like Cecilia's motivations and her characterizations are rooted in these instances of like what she's learning, right? So then we fast forward, we get like there's a big sad thing that happens. If you've read it, you know, like Dominic gets shot or whatever by some other person. There's
Which
it doesn't make
okay.
any fucking sense the way that the gangs are set up or
Well,
mafia is
because
set up.
the idea is that, like, they're all a part of the Ravenhood, and there's different chapters throughout the country. So they have, like, Virginia, they have Florida, they have blah, 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 like, all of the other countries. And I don't know, you don't really know if their centralized goal is to, like, destroy all CEOs, like, because you only know that Tobias and, like, Dominic's goal is just to destroy Roman specifically. Well, I don't know if these other chapters are more interested in their local, like, businesses that are exploiting the workers, or if they're like in general they're like, oh, like we want to rid the world of all exploitation. We don't get that. I don't know if you
Because
ever
we
get that.
only get Cecila's, like, point of view in the first
Yeah,
2 books, and it's awful, so you're just like, whatever they feed her in
that's what she
regards to, like,
believes.
their businesses is what you get,
And so basically
right?
you have like the even like these people that Cecilia's met before that are supposed to be like they're a part of the Ravenhood. So they're supposed to be like live or die by like their code or whatever, right? That's like we want they high like without saying it, they're like we want what's best for the workers. We don't want the rich to do what they do to the poor people. That's like their overall messages. But then you have the Spanish lullaby is what they call them or whatever, who then show up because I guess they've just abandoned their principles and they're like, "Oh, like there's a hit on Roman and his daughter and we're getting paid to do it and we only care about money." But they don't only care about money because when Tobias offers them double what they're getting paid by whoever whatever, like whatever they were offered, he's like, "Oh, I'll pay you double if you don't do this." And they're like, "Okay, we'll take it." But then they're actually lying and they're going to kill Dominic, where it's like, hello? So is your motivating factor money or is it not money? Because it cannot be both at the same time.
Yes, and, like, you don't get any other information about this until the 3rd one, where you actually understand, like, the structure of the Ravenhood and its, like, origin story, and it's very unfortunate and really poorly paced. This should have been something that was in the this easily could have been, like, 2 books with, like, less pages, and you could have got these ideas across, but she just drags it out as a means of, like, delivering erotica, and I thought, like, the idea of having, like, an "eat the rich" quote unquote romance was cool. I was like, "Oh, that's different than the regular, like, QAnon, like, type
Yeah,
weird
like
shit that,
haunting
like, is pop."
Adeline or like even Credence that's just grown men creeping on. Because it didn't
But
need to be
then
in this book. You could have just had a regular
no,
mafia romance.
I wish it would have been better. It would have been better if it was just that, but the fact that they tie in so much, like, politics because at the very end of the 2nd book, after Cecilia and Tobias, it's 8 years in the future, she leaves her, perfect fiancé, right? And then is like, "I'm going to turn or help turn my father's work into a worker like a worker self-directed enterprise, and they're like working on the board to try to figure out how over the next couple of years they can get the workers on board so that they are able to take care of it themselves. Like they want to completely transition it so that they have the tools, like the workers can do it themselves, like everything. That's what they're doing in the 2nd book. But then it like gets overshadowed by some other shit that's like the relationship. Very frustrating. And that's about it, like what we get with Ravenhood, I guess, in the 2nd book. But it's the 3rd book. That's the only thing I want to talk about because there's so much in the 3rd book that is relevant. Kristen stopped before they were like the 8 years in the future. I
I
think.
read the beginning of it where, like, she basically went to Dominic's grave or whatever, and, like, his aunt died or whatever, and then they were, like, sitting there being, like she was sitting there being emo, and then you basically find out that her dad just dies of colon cancer, like, 2 years after so before, like, the second part in the second book. So it's literally, like, that's the big bad villain, and he just dies of colon cancer. It literally means nothing. This whole first 1.5 books of building up this big evil CEO. It's just like, yeah, and then he died peacefully in his sleep, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like I'm trying to think. Like, in the second book, she does. She goes to the grave of Dominic several times and's crying. She's trying to, like, pick up on Tobias, but guess what? Tobias ends up getting with that young girl that you meet in the first, like, biker or, like, meetup,
Yeah.
like, the younger one. They're, like, together, and she's just like, "Oh, I left my ex-fiance for this." And it's like, nobody asked you. And everyone in the town hates her because Tessa, the dressmaker, ends up getting with Sean. They get married and they have kids, and Tessa's just like, "I can't even look at you." Like, it's
Why?
really messy and cringe because they had something that she could never give them, and she's the reason that Dominic died, all this like, everyone in the town hates her. Every single human being in the town hates Cecilia.
Me too, though. So who could blame him?
It's and she just, like, keeps going, but then Cecilia, like, finally, like, stands up for herself and she's like, "Either man up and, like, face your feelings or, like, I'm out." And then she leaves and she goes and, like, works at this little, I don't know, pancake cafe. I don't know the fuck it was. And she looks on the news and she sees Tyler, who was a member of the Ravenhood, who's standing next to the president, Preston, and she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, they're doing it."
Yeah,
What they're
because
doing, we don't
that's
know.
that's exactly what that means you win whenever you're in presidential power.
I was like, "Oh, that's so weird." 3rd book, though, this is so the 3rd book, Preston, we find out is actually somebody that Tobias went to school with because he ended up having to, like, go to school with Preston or whatever. They became friends, and then they end up, like, working together to, like, develop, like, policies to, like, redistribute tax the rich, I guess, on, like, a larger frame. There's no real clear, but, like, Preston is, like, the only president that's on the side of the people. He's also, like, the youngest guy. So he's like an FDR, but, like, better is the way it's pitched in the book, I guess.
FDR. FDR was
You know,
old.
like, what I mean the policies.
Oh. You said young guy.
Yeah, oh my god, I can't. Anyways,
Bruh.
we find out, right, that the aunt was organizing, right? A lot of the like, Tobias's family, like, the stepdad and the mom move here, and they're, like, organizing against Cecilia's dad, is what it seems like. They're trying to form a union at bare minimum. On a larger scale, they're actually, like, a proper organization. Um, but then we find out that it's Cecilia's mom is a pregnant teenager who was hooking up with
The
Cecilia's
CEO.
dad and makes a mistake and accidentally catches them
Yeah.
on fire because it's like a chemical plant. And
How
then
is it a chemical plant?
the
They're
mom
making fucking calculators.
before it burned down.
Oh, so they started calculators later?
Yeah, it was like a chemical plant and like hello. Brandon's gotta listen to all of this. He already had to listen to it before. Anyways, we find out that, and then she feels bad, she has to leave, but then because Roman has so many hits against him for whatever reason, he has to, like, send her away because they were,
Yeah.
like, together for, like,
He's
a
like,
hot
"I
minute,
can't have someone I love because then that shows
right?
weakness."
Because he goes to, like, pick up the baby, like, baby Cecilia, and then inside the crib is a gun, and they're like, "Oh my god, we can never work out." So that's, like, part of the reason that Cecilia's mom is an alcoholic, but then the other part is, like, she is taking the money that she's getting for child support from Roman and is sending it to the aunt, like, Tobias and Dominic's aunt to help them stay afloat.
And
So
so that's
that's
why
why they were
she's
poor.
poor?
Like, yeah, she was literally doing it, so she's just like, "Yeah, we just had to, like, really struggle because she saw Tobias walking into the store one day,
I
because
know your
Dominic was
child
sick."
support is way more than that, bro. There's no way. You know, you coulda saved the money and just lived together in the house.
I don't know why it ended up going that way, but, like, she was the one sending money to make or I think she sent, like, food packages, so they would just be, like, things, like clothes sent to, like, the house because like, the aunt was also an alcoholic because she was in an abusive relationship. But then we also
Yeah.
find out that Tobias had to get involved with, like, the mafia in France, so that was, like, part of his startup with, like, learning, like, the underground aspect. It gets really weird, so that is, like, the overarching reason that, like, the Miami or whatever is going in to kill them, is because it was actually the mafia guy, and then we find out actually Cecilia was in on it the whole time,
Or Roman knew
and
about it and told Tobias to protect her.
yeah, this is, like, where it starts to get humanizing, and then we actually find out that Cecilia's mom was there with him when he died and kissed his lips on his last breath or something. Mind she's married to somebody
And
else.
else. Yeah.
It's very weird, very cringy, and, like, Tobias starts to get scared because he's like, "Oh my gosh, this mafia guy is gonna, like he's, like, following me." So they have to, like, go to Preston and get the Secret Service to protect them. So it's like the revolutionaries are working with the government, but the epilogue of this book is where it gets weird because there's a line where it says, "We utilize our position in every imaginable way, going head to head with the biggest threats, mostly corrupt corporations and media conglomerates controlled by deep states." And I was like,
So then it's
"Oh, there
like,
it is."
"Oh, it's conspiracy theory the whole
It's
time."
literally it was that's where it gets scary because I was like, "Why are we having" but they don't outright say anything about capitalism. They don't
Oh,
say anything else. Like, there's no mention, but it can be so easily just pitched as, like, an eat the rich, but it's not. It was never that. It was just about, like, these greedy corporations and, like, the insinuation that if you, like, treated your workers better, um,
then
it
you're
might be fine.
fine. Yeah.
But also, like, the way that they watch the news, there's, like, the one instance in Exodus where they're watching the news together and they're like, "Oh my god, the terrorist," and I was just like, that's weird. That's a really weird thing to say if you guys are both, like, on the side of the oppressors, like, and you're just eating up CNN.
Well, because that's what well, there's, like, something where they'll be, like, watching, they'll be like, "That's bullshit," where they're, like, pushing this narrative onto someone that doesn't deserve this narrative to be pushed onto them. Sorta
But it
like
doesn't outright say what it is, so it's like, yeah, like, that can be true. Obviously, media bias is real, but it's not because of, like, a reptilian deep state, like, conspiracy theories. It's because of, like, the economic ruling class wanting to push a certain narrative to keep the people, like, complacent with what they're pushing forth with, like, the military industrial complex and whatnot. So that is, like, the craziest thing is where it concluded on the deep state, and I think it's interesting because we're seeing a lot of people right now who are also like, okay, healthcare CEOs are bad, but other CEOs aren't because healthcare CEOs are bad because of health insurance. So if we had universal healthcare, the other CEOs would be fine. So we have this really big disconnect. And I think it's very apparent in the way that the author writes this story and the subplot of politics, which nobody in their right mind should have to fucking trudge through all of this just to extract that, but the way it's advertised as being like a rave or a Robin Hood retelling, and I don't know about you, I don't consider a Robin Hood retelling to be like a right wing thing.
not
I think that's weird.
Robin Hood specifically, because I think the whole idea is that, like, Robin Hood steals from the rich and the greedy and gives to the poor, which is, like, yes, an idea of Marxism, but also not it's not inherently left wing either, I would say, because, like, the idea of, like, Robin Hood, which is, like,
But he
yes,
was
good
stealing
in
directly from the
principle,
feudal lords, right? That were taxing and tariffing and doing all of those things directly to the serfs. Like that's the direct relation.
but it's again, it's
Is it
not
not?
doing anything to overthrow the system where it's just like, "Oh, maybe one day if these poor people can pull themselves up by the bootstraps, they'll be the feudal lords themselves." Sort of idea, where I think even, like, Robin Hood with, like, the vigilante style of, like, motive and narrative where, like, yes, I understand, like, it's good to, like, do what you can, but it's also, like, you're not doing anything of substantial value if, like, these people are still, like, poor the next week or whatever because of what
Well,
happens.
exactly, because Dominic, like, what he ends up doing is, like, he's going into, like, bank accounts of, like, the, like, one percenters and is taking money from
Stealing
them, and
money.
then the money is going into their local community. It's not directly from, um Roman's accounts, like, where
No.
he earned his money from them and then being distributed that way, he's just, like, picking whichever ones. So it's just, like, very centered around their small town
And not to
and, like, small
mention
town business politics, which should have been the red flag there was this, like, small town corporation, but then there's, like, a revolutionary aspect to it, and it just reads like somebody that has the right ideas, but really needs more political education. Because I do think that if Kate Stewart took the time to read theory and, like, the history of some movements, that would be
revolutionary
great, but it
movements.
just seems like the only thing she knows is that, like, the French Revolution. So she's like, "Imma make him French, and I also speak French."
People were complaining about the French that she used or whatever, where it was basically just like Google translated to not even like accurate to like a French sentence. I saw, but I was gonna say too, doesn't Tobias end up becoming like a billionaire?
Yeah, because
But
this whole thing is like, well, I have to, like, build myself up, put on a persona so that I can come in and buy these businesses and fund this underground thing, which,
like
like, to an
as we
extent makes
know,
sense, but
how you cannot ethically become a billionaire. Can you, Mariah?
that's where it gets weird, though, is the way that they're trying to pitch it as him being an ethical billionaire because of his business practices, and I was like, "That's still not how it works, and it cannot work, nor
One of
should we try to embrace the idea that that's something we should strive for."
No, because it very much does just like the overall is like Roman actually wasn't that bad of a guy. He was a guy. He was just a
They
dude.
try to make a lot of parallels between Tobias and Roman, and then Cecilia's like, "Oh, he's just like my dad," and I was like, "That's really fucking weird."
Why would you say
That's not
that
a
about the
lot.
person that you're never mind. But there was one scene in the second book that really pissed me off because like you have Cecilia where right after the scene where she gets like her trust fund or whatever from her dad and she's like super emo cuz she's like my dad never loved me blah blah blah. He's just a dick blah 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 which you later learn he did that so that his enemies didn't kill her or whatever. But then she has this line that says, "For a moment, I pity Roman. I'm positive he's never spent a minute out here simply enjoying his life. He could, at any time, make the decision to enjoy the fruits of his labor."
You
And
mean of his workers' labor.
yes, because, like, that to me shows that this author does not actually understand worker exploitation or surplus labor value or anything of that nature because it thinks that just because the CEO, Roman, he took the risk of owning that company or whatever it is you guys think, like these people think, that he deserves to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Where what laboring is he actually doing besides walking around being in meetings? To do what?
It's like, I don't get it because, like, in the 3rd book, right, they're like there's a line I can't remember who they're talking about, but it must have been between the brothers, but somebody said, "Once we take Roman down, there's like 100 like him to take his place. They exploit people like our parents and discard them once they become a liability." I glanced down at the 3 of them, which she's talking to Sean, Tyler, and Dominic. What are we gonna do about them? So it's very focused, and it kinda makes sense because I guess the stepdad's, like, dream was to have a quote unquote, "lead a revolt against the greedy leaders of corporate America," namely Roman Horner. To fight for the good of the common man is like what the overarching politics of the Brothers of Raymond, like the Ravenhood, was. That was the goal, the original goal. So it's not rooted in economics in that way. It's just a bunch of individual actors that are bad. And I think that's really problematic when you're going to have an eat the rich type romance. And I was very frustrated. How can you come to that conclusion and not see that it's the system?
Yeah, like, they again, like, that's the thing is, with, like, not only these, but, like, just people in general too, they want to individualize everything, and they see it as, like, one person, one thing, one blah, 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 when in reality, it's, like, the collective it's, like, the 2 collectives against each other. It's the collective of the rich and the collective of the poor. They're 2 separate distinct groups that are on opposing sides, not left and right or whatever you want to say. It's the poor versus the rich. Objectively, like we know this. But the problem is that these people are viewing the rich as just one entity or one person whenever it's a group of people that are upholding these systems to keep workers and people down.
Which, like, if you have ever watched Fox News, like, recently, they spend a lot of time talking about crony capitalism or corporatism. They're like, "It's not capitalism that's the issue. It's, like, these corporations." I was like, "But the goal of capitalism is monopoly." Like, it's a tendency towards monopoly, and Lenin talks about this in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Like, it's just the nature of the system of that competition is to be on top.
You
It's
want to
not
be
just
the
to have, like,
best.
"Oh, here's my little bit. I think I'm done for now." Like, no, that's like what competition is. Because of a society that is built on greed, which is a product of capitalism. Like, that's not like an innately human attribute. It is the
Mhm.
system that's like
Yes.
you want to seek as much as you physically can because it's based in like individualism.
Yes, and then this continues to reinforce that individualist ideals too, and so that's how you know it's not like communist or Marxist or communal in any type of way or even socialist because they're still not viewing everything as a collective. They view their small town as a collective, but they don't even like understand, like, the workers being separated. Like, they don't understand that it's all workers, not just every worker that works at, like, a expensive factory owned by a big CEO. It's still the same workers that are working at a restaurant that is owned by one person, or it's the same people being working at, like, a coffee shop or a bookstore or any other place that you work that even if it's just owned by, like, a mom and pop, you're still being exploited. It doesn't matter where
And
you
I
are.
do like it all kind of ties back into the like first reference of George Orwell in the first book because in like I know Animal Farm wasn't the one that was referenced. Animal Farm is like predicated on the idea that like oh the the overarching ruling party was bad, but then the revolutionary party, even though the ideas in on paper are great in practice, they're just as bad as the other guy. Like that's kind of like the vibe it gives because him talking about like his stepdad like having a pipe dream and like the revolutionaries like it was just like nonsensical and that you actually have to work within the system to make it work for you. I i think that is indicative of there's a lot, and I would love to be able to pick the author's brain because I do think there's potential for growth
I mean, there's
if
obvious
they're
potential
willing
for
to learn.
growth, especially if you that's again, it's another thing where, like, experiencing wealth inequality or being poor in anything, again, is not going to be enough to radicalize you. I don't know, like, the author growing up or, like, what they've experienced or something, but you can tell they're obviously sympathetic to, like, people that are less fortunate than they are and stuff like that, where you can see that where they, like, try to paint that, at least in the way of that they have these novels and stuff where they show they like, oh, like being less fortunate like sucks and stuff like that, and we should do something to uplift that. But then completely like ignoring that it being like capitalism is the reason why that is, or like not even like mentioning like even not even just that, but like also like the government having many ways to play in that with like the lobbyists and the rich and stuff like that that directly fund our government, which we can see with like Elon Musk having his hands in like the entirety of the US government where he's not even an American citizen. And people are like talking about, oh, Elon Musk should be the Speaker of the House. Like, I'm sorry? This is what we're dealing
it
with now.
This is why like we have to push back against like anti-intellectualism. We really need to use a lot of these current events to try to like bring people over to the right direction because when we have stories like this, it's very clear that the American people are not um like critically analyzing the media that they're consuming. Because I went back through some of the reviews and somebody even said, let me see if I can find it for I think it was maybe Exodus. Yeah, somebody named Paige was saying, I don't care for the politics of this book. The gang vigilante group cult was weird and wasn't really explained. And then where was the other one? It says I ended up reading about politics, economy, and social issues and 20-year-old grudges that were all poorly written, developed, and explored. The only romance was a damn romanticizing of toxic men.
I
Oh, that
mean,
was
like,
2 separate people. Sorry. There was, like, people complaining about, like, the politics and, like, them not caring about the politics in these books, or they were just like, I
again,
don't care enough about the politics. I was like, but they're kind of there. And if you're getting like any sort of like subliminal messaging or like not critically engaging with the content that you're reading, I think that's really weird.
I can understand like where these people are coming from because again, the politics and like the economy and the social issues that they bring up are so like, for lack of a better term, they're corny. Like this is not like it's not even, like, relevant in the way that, like, even, like, with, political, like, fantasies and stuff like that, where we have, stories, like, even, like, Throne of
Like,
Glass
The Will
and
of the
stuff like that,
Many,
or, like
like, does a better job of, like, getting these ideas across about, like, who's the exploiters, like, what's being exploited, like, even though it's a fantastical system and it's not gonna
yeah,
be necessarily rooted back to capitalism, is a lot more clear and concise, but I think because this is a contemporary romance, I find it really frustrating because, like, The Will of Many has a lot of, like, opportunities to, like, be something really great because it is fantasy. This is contemporary, so it's supposed to be rooted in, like, the material
reality,
reality that we live in.
and it's
So
not.
that's my contention. It's so weird. There was some really funny things that I think we can, like, wrap up on with, like, the negative, reviews. One person named Julia, I think this would be your bestie if you were to message them, said, "Cecilia grew up sick, I grew up illiterate," or "I grew up literate."
Yeah,
That was a negative review for Flock, and then they also said, "You told in Exodus, you told me this would get better. You promised. You said you were going to bawl your eyes out. Oh, I did. I did cry, wishing once again I was illiterate."
yeah.
So,
It's quite
these are
literally so wasteful of your time.
I think it's a waste of paper. There was no reason for these to be this long.
It's so bad, like, it's honestly, like if you just like, I think the only reason why you would ever choose to read these books is because you care about if you like, toxic relationships, which is, like, I already am not super into, like, that whenever I'm reading, and I don't even like, people that are, instantly I love a good slow burn. It has to be slow, there has to be tension, they have to not even look each other in the eyes for the first 100 pages, they have to and I can respect, an enemies to lovers thing, but this isn't even like enemies to lovers in a way at all because yes, you have the dynamic of Tobias and Cecilia hating each other the entire time, but it's like in reality, you know entirely how it's going to happen. Like it's so
Yeah, it's, like,
predictable.
lacking luster. This story would have been better and more impactful if it was completely divorced from politics and they just made it a mafia. Like, I stand by that. They could have deleted it all out. There was no reason to have it. Like, you shouldn't talk about politics like this if you have no knowledge on it
Yeah,
besides, like, what the regular, like, uh, corporate media, like, is teaching about
which is
politics or what you
literally
learned in
all this
college or
is.
high school.
It literally is not there's no deeper
It's a very
analysis.
super it's so surface level, and it's, like, meant to be, like, the force that propels the story, and it's just bad, and now there's all these spinoffs. I'm not touching any of the spinoffs. I'm not doing that. I don't fucking care. I saw them, and there's, like, one for Dominic, and this is, like
For
it
what?
was called, like,
He's dead.
One Last Rainy Day. Couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell I don't know
Probably
if it was about his time in France or before. I don't care.
you know what it is. It's all just smut. That's literally all these
There's one
books
for
are.
Tyler. I
Why
think
is
there
there
might be
one
one
for
for
him?
Kristen. It's about
Preston.
him and the ants,
Oh, him and that old
I guess
lady.
from
Don't worry,
before.
guys. Women can be creeps too. This old ass lady is hitting it up with the 18-year-old.
I think he may have even been younger, so I don't know. It's very weird. I cannot not recommend these enough. Don't read them. I mean,
Well,
like,
if
I
you
read
listen
them
to
for them
this, you
being
can't.
messy.
There's no point in reading
Yeah,
it.
just
Unless I
spoil it
if you
all. It's
care
just
about the toxicness of three men, which two of them aren't even relevant after the second book. It's
no,
literally
not at all.
the first book you have the first book is so incredibly boring too because the entire plot of the first book is oh Cecilia's please tell me what's going on I want to know and then Sean's well we can't tell you just yet because we can't fully trust you because we don't know blah 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 and she's I hate my dad, I'm not going to tell anyone. It's cool, you're cool. And then she'd be okay, what's going on? And be I still can't say anything.
Yeah, like, the whole thing, like, every issue in this book could have been resolved by having, like, clear communication. Like, there would have not been any issues if they would have just vetted Cecilia. Nobody else would have died. They could have just, like, worked together, but no, they wanted to be, like, weird and
Yeah,
not say anything. Cecilia, like, did show some oomph. She's like, "Okay, I'm down for the cause." Just I I don't know. It's very messy. I thought it was, like, entertaining in the worst possible way. Like, it was just a train wreck the entire
I
time.
couldn't even see it
Um
as entertaining. That's the problem though, is because the
I think that's
drama
what
is
people get
not
because if
even
you liked 50 Shades or something, or like Twilight, like the drama and the relationship
I like
dynamics, like
Twilight. I didn't hate Twilight. I thought Twilight was interesting. But, like, this is, like, a whole lot of actually nothing. Like, it's literally, like, not complex. It's so surface level where you're like, "Okay, like, who cares?" Like, I have no you don't care about the characters. At least, like, with Twilight, where you're gonna criticize Twilight, like, I think Edward and Bella I mean, Bella not as much, but, like, Edward and Jacob are more interesting characters than any single character in these books. Like, and Mariah's like, "Oh, like, you
yeah.
don't love Tobias?" "No, I don't. He's a freak."
That was sarcasm. That was sarcasm. I promise you I should have put like the slash s. I knew you wouldn't. I promise. I don't
If
like any of
he's
these
leading the
characters. I just thought it was
revolution,
funny.
I'm going to the other side. I'm sorry. If he's
Oh my
supposed to
god.
be, like, our Marxist
Hey, he's
leader,
leading
get me
the
out of here.
reactionary revolution.
Yeah. This is
Like
entirely, like, a reactionary book.
anyways, I don't know that we have much more to say. It basically is this episode is just an hour of complaining, and you know what? Sometimes we need that. And now
Um,
Kristen will never let me live it down that I tried to push this book. Thrust it upon him.
I tried very hard. I was reading, like, I literally, like, I usually whenever
Let me
I'm
play a sad song on the world's smallest violin.
I
I
tried. I really tried. I was reading this and I was like, like it can't be that bad. People are loving it, blah blah blah. And it's literally just so boring. It's literally just like repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. You get like the five same scenes over and over again for 500 pages.
I really don't know how it made it past an editor.
I don't I think it was self-published at first. So,
This is
which
not
I don't know how
a
much
dig
they
at
changed.
self-publishing, but I do think you should have, somebody else, read it for objectivity purposes, because when you're, like, doing your own thing, it can be
That's the
hard.
thing,
I
and
think somebody should have stepped back and read it and be like, "Hey, you should probably take out some of these sections."
well, that's the
Where
thing
were the beta
too.
readers?
Is that, like that again, like, I understand, like, self-publishing is a much more accessible way, like, me and Mariah will never dislike self-publishing, like, to get your story out there, you kind of don't really have a choice because, like, getting, like, a name publisher is very hard to do, but, also, that doesn't mean you don't need a friend or a family member or somebody who opinion you fully trust, and I know there has to be someone in your life that you fully trust. If you fully trust them, have them just read it, and then if they're like, "Hey, like, this" if they're, like, if they tell you that there's nothing wrong with your book, they don't care about you. They want you to suffer. They're throwing you to the wolves, where you need someone who can be critical of you and to be able to, like, pick pick you when you're wrong and stuff like that. And this series desperately needed this, but I don't even know if this series needed to be put out into the world, to be honest.
At least we have reviewed it. So, there we go. Thank you for listening to this
Don't
episode.
recommend any dark romances to me ever again.
I don't know in 2025 if we are going to read any dark romances unless they are
Mariah's
like
gonna make me
200 pages
read
max.
Scythe
And they
and
have
Sparrow.
I don't know if we're going to be able to record it for the podcast though cuz it comes out the same no, it comes out in February, huh? And then the next month is Hunger
Hunger
Games
Games
month.
month. Yeah. Well, what are we doing
So,
next?
Shark Heart question mark.
Do you want to do that or do you want to do RUR?
I kind of think we could do something for RUR.
So
I can't
either
read RUR and let me know what you think.
okay. Well, for those of you that don't know, RUR is a science fiction dystopian. Is it dystopian? I guess technically.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's
Play
Rossum's automatic or no.
robots.
I can't
I
remember.
know one of the
Something
Army's
robot.
robots.
But it's Rossum's Robots. It was written back in the 1920s and it's like robot revolution.
Yeah. Where
Universal.
I think
Universal
that'll be
robots.
inherently better and more revolutionary and more relevant to what me and Mariah like and want out of stories that we consume, which I don't know, I haven't read it yet. I found it
I think it
rateably
would be a good
online.
way to kick off
The new year?
the month of January because it also is like uh what poverty awareness or something month, so we can talk about the
Okay.
industrial revolution. in working class.
RUR.
I don't know. If
Next,
anyone has any book recommendations, let us know too.
not dark romance though. Do not recommend me any of those. I don't care how revolutionary it is. I'm not reading it. If 90% of it, if 51% of it is romance, relationship, whatever have you, don't give it to me. Do not keep it to yourself. Tell Mariah to read it and you can message her on Fable, Storygraph, TikTok not very much sooner, Instagram, and you can talk to Mariah about it. But I'm not talking to Mariah about this bullshit anymore. I'm done. That was my final straw. Reading the Ravenhood books, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. This is terrible. Waste of my damn time. And Mariah wants to criticize uh freaking The Will of the Many for being too long and drawn out. At least that has a purpose. That is so much better and so much more entertaining than any of this. And if you think otherwise, I can't.
So maybe next, if I find a dark romance book in the future, maybe it could just be me complaining about it to you.
Yeah, which
And
is
then you just sit here and are receptive of it, and you're just like, "Yeah, this sounds messed up." I don't know. We'll come up with a way. I'm sure it'll come up in the future. Anyways,
Anyways, thanks for listening. I guess we're doing RUR by I don't know. His name is like something weird.
he's from
Chizek?
the Czech Republic. Karl Kapik.
Okay. RUR by Carl Kapik will be next month's episode. We will have an episode coming out in between this though, before our next episode.
Reading Wrapped.
Where we'll be doing our wrap up for 2024 since the year is over. So make sure you guys check that out whenever it is. And other than that, I don't think there's anything else we have to say. So thank you and good night.